Welcome in to another episode of the Barnes on Bama podcast. I'm your host, Owen Barnes, and we have a lot to discuss. First things first, I want to thank all the new subscribers. I really do appreciate you guys. It's people like you that allow me to have the opportunity to interview people like Bobby Humphrey, that his team was gracious enough to reach out to me. If you have not seen that episode, I really recommend checking it out. As we talked about on that episode, the Alabama Football Nothing But a Winner movie comes out on July the 31st. It's going to only be in theaters for 4 days. If you have not already gotten your tickets, I really would recommend you do so. If you are not currently subscribed to the channel, if you could drop me a subscribe in the bottom. I say this because about 80% of the people that watch these videos and watch the channel are not currently subscribed. So if you could do that, I really would appreciate it. As always, if you hear any ads, it's because I am a part of the Believe Podcast Network, and anything you could do to help out those sponsors really does help me out. We have a little bit of a different episode today. I wanted to do a single episode to kind of break down my thoughts as to this upcoming football season. I'm going to do the exact same thing for basketball season to just give you guys a little bit of a rundown on what the plan is. I want to talk about the knowns versus the unknowns. I don't want to say the good versus the bad because I don't think it's exactly bad. I just think some of it's unknown and some things that we're going to have to look at for this upcoming season. Some players who I think that are truly poised for a breakout season. Obviously, some that I think are, the obvious ones that had big seasons last year, as well as some that I think may surprise some people this upcoming season. I want to give some predictions for this season. Some of them are just going to be kind of overall predictions. Some of them may be kind of bold. Then I'm going to give my season thoughts. I'm going to go through the schedule game by game, say where I think there may be some potential trap games, where I think some of the games that Alabama needs to be careful of, as well as what my prediction for that is. And then finally, I'm going to predict my Barnes on Bama winner for the SEC, right? Who I think the SEC championship game is going to be, as well as who I think the winner is. So like I said, this is going to be a single episode to kind of break down all things Alabama football. And then, probably next month I will do one about Alabama basketball, just so that this kind of serves as my entire thoughts for the upcoming season. And we can refer back to this, all throughout the actual season as it goes. So let's get right into the show. First things first, knowns versus unknowns. When you're talking about knowns, I'm, referring to, for example, our receiving core. I think the receiving core is going to be one of the biggest known commodities of this upcoming season. You have returners in Jeremy Bernard and Ryan Williams. You also have a guy in transfer, Isaiah Horton, which I think are massive. So your starting three are absolutely known commodities that are very good. Isaiah Horton obviously coming into a new role on a new team, but I do think that he's going to fit in very nicely. And then you have a lot of really, really good talent behind them. But I do think in general, the fact that our receiving core is going to be good is a very well-known commodity. I would also say the same thing about our offensive line. It's a little bit of unknown versus unknown on that line. Looking at Clint Lamb's predictions for who he has the starters, for the starters you're going to know, right, because they played a huge amount of games last season, and Caden Proctor, Parker Brailsford, Jaden Roberts, and Wilkin Formby. Obviously, Wilkin Formby fully sliding into that starting role this upcoming season. And then finally, you have Cam Dewberry, the transfer from Texas A&M. He has him beating out Geno Vandermark for the left guard position. So I would consider that another fully known commodity for the most part. That's a side of the ball that I think is going to do very, very well. Do very, very well this upcoming season. Because, again, these guys have played a lot of snaps with each other. And for the most part, you know what you're getting out of your offensive line. So I do think that your offensive line is another piece where I think you're going to have a lot of success. The last piece of that is, again, your running backs, right? I think your running backs on that on the offense are another fairly known commodity, right? I do think that you have some guys poised for breakout seasons, but by and large, you have a guy in Jam Miller that's stepping into more of a role. Justice Haynes obviously no longer on the team, so you have a guy in Jam Miller that you're going to be your for sure number one, and then Richard Young and Daniel Hill are your kind of 2-3 punch. That's the ones that as if you watched my episode that I did with Clint Lamb, Clint's of the mindset that Daniel Hill potentially is going to, start getting enough snaps that he's going to be seen as like a surefire can't miss guy. Maybe he doesn't take snaps with the ones, but every time he gets in, it seems like, hey, he's the best running back on the field. But again, that running back room in general, I think, is a fairly known commodity because of Jam Miller and because of what you're getting out of Jam Miller. I think that the running back room is going to have a floor that is something that's going to be passable, for the entire season. Obviously, the unknown when you go to the offense is the quarterback position. And it has to be the quarterback position. And the thing is, this is why I didn't want to say good versus bad, because I do not believe, and we'll get into my predictions later, but I do not believe that Ty Simpson is going to be bad at the starting quarterback for the University of Alabama. I think that Ty Simpson is going to be a good starting quarterback to very good, right? Get kind of putting the cart before the horse, but I currently look at Ty Simpson potentially as a top 5 to top 3 quarterback in the SEC if he plays to his potential, right? I think that he is up in that realm of going to do very positive things for the offense and is going to run the offense successfully. I would look at him much more of a Mac Jones, where he sat and kind of waited his turn and is now ready to flourish. I think that a lot also has to be said of the fact that Ty Simpson's, dad being a college football coach and, him having that coaching around him, but also sitting and staying. I think that it's a situation where Ty Simpson actually put in the work and didn't just kind of sulk because he didn't get the starting job. I think he was fully aware of what all was going on, and Ty Simpson, prepared to be ready for what it takes to be the starting cornerback at the University of Alabama. So personally, I'm of the mindset that even though he is an unknown commodity, obviously none of the quarterbacks in the quarterback room are a known commodity. But even though he is that unknown commodity, I do think that he's going to be a very good quarterback. And again, I do think that Ty Simpson is somebody that's going to be able to lead Alabama to a lot of success this upcoming season. I think that he is obviously the key when you look at Ryan Grubb coming in as the new offensive coordinator. When you look at what Kalen DeBoer has been able to do outside of Jalen Milroe, Kalen DeBoer has like a 4,000-yard passer just about every season. I think that Ty Simpson is going to be able to slot in and be able to get the ball into those receivers' hands that we talked about a little earlier. And I think that they're going to be able to have a lot of success. I do think that Ty Simpson, again, definitely unknown going into the season, but I do think that he is a guy that's going to be able to wow people and kind of show people, he sat, but it wasn't because he was a bad quarterback. He just had to sit and wait his turn. Like I said, I truly do think this is a Mac Jones situation and that Ty Simpson comes in and plays absolutely phenomenally. We switch over to the defensive side of the ball. The known commodity is absolutely the defensive backs. The defensive backs are in a position where, you have a lot of experience in that back end. The youngest guy in the back end played an entire season last season in Xavier Brown. You also just have the guys who you have coming in. They are highly, highly talented guys that I think are going to have a lot of success, but you're not throwing them into a position where they're going to have to play every single snap, right? I think a guy like Dijon Lee long-term is going to be a really, really good fit for the University of Alabama, but we're not putting him in a position where he has to be cornerback 1 starting out right at the beginning, right? You already have Damani Jackson. You already have Xavier Lee. So Dijon Lee isn't going to have to be that main guy to start, right? Long-term, I think he's going to be able to be that guy, but because of who all you have and the known commodity that you have back there, you have Keon Sabb back, you have Bray Hubbard back, you have all these different guys that are going to be able to play in that back end. I think that is the biggest known commodity for the University of Alabama this upcoming season. The unknown commodity when we're looking at the defense, in my opinion, is what the linebacking core looks like. You have a ton of experience, right? An absolute ton of experience. However, you have a new guy in Nakai Hill-Green that's coming over from Colorado that is the transfer, so you are curious how he's going to slide in. Personally, I think that he's going to slide in very, very well. I think the linebacking core is going to be a strength of this year's team, but I still have to be curious on what we're going to use him for and how exactly he's going to fit into our system. I do think that, again, he is going to fit in perfectly well. If you are curious about my specific thoughts on the linebacking core, I did a whole video, where I had a segment talking about them. Spoiler alert, I think that the linebackers are going to be really, really good, but Nakai Hill-Green is still an unknown for the University of Alabama this upcoming season. But additionally, you have Deontay Lawson coming off of the injury, and you never are sure when somebody comes off of injury how good they're going to be able to be. when they really get back. And so that's the other unknown. Again, when you have a guy that is coming off of injury mixed in with a guy that's going to be a transfer, again, do I think that they're going to be very successful? Yes. This is one of our oldest groups on the entire team. You have two graduates and one redshirt senior, right? This is an absolutely loaded, super old group. So I do think that this group is going to be very successful. But again, I think that they're a bit of an unknown commodity until we see a couple of games because of Nikhai Hill-Green never being in our system before, and then Deontay Lawson coming off of the injury. The other thing that I'm looking at is I'm looking for the guy on the unknown side is who is going to be that elite pass rusher this upcoming season. Alabama did not have it a ton last season, and it's something that I think really hurt us. There was a lot of discussion around how LT Overton wasn't able to fully finish his sacks. He had a lot of quarterback hurries and got to the quarterback a ton, but wasn't able to finish his sacks. I believe, your leading sack guy last season was Jahad Campbell coming from the linebacking core. But again, I just am very curious what Alabama was able to do with with the pass rush, right? Who the pass rush is going to be and who steps up in that pass rush, who is able to, be the guy and be able to really be a force on the inside, be a force on the line, on that defensive line, I think is where the question mark when you're talking about the defense is. I think that the back end is going to be very stable, and I think that you're going to be able to, the defensive backs are going to give Alabama some time to get to that quarterback. But again, that is still the question that I have for this for this defense is where's the pass rush going to come from? Again, I have some answers. I have some ideas as to where I think that might come from, but I still think that that's the biggest unknown commodity when we're looking at Alabama's defense this upcoming season is where's the pass rush going to come from? I think that they're going to cause a lot of turnovers, intercepting the football, going for the fumble. I think that in general, Alabama's defense is going to do a good job turning over the opponent. But being able to pressure the quarterback and get the ball out of that quarterback's hands as quickly as possible, I think is going to be a big key because if you can do that, that's obviously going to lead to those interceptions that we talked about and going to give those safeties and those corners the ability to kind of put their eyes on the ball and make a break on it if you have, you're rushing the quarterback to get it out earlier than he's accustomed to or ready to. So that's my big question when I'm looking at the defense is where's the pass rush going to come from? I think that, like I said, I think that there's a lot of possible answers to this, and I'm open to any options that anybody has to say. But again, I think that that is the biggest question when we're looking at the defense this upcoming season. So then we go over to players who I think are going to have some breakout seasons. Some of these I think are, well-known commodities. I think that some of these are going to be some newcomers. First guy that I think is kind of a shoe-in to have and just an absolute knockout season is Jeremy Bernard. I think that Jeremy Bernard is going to be stepping into a role with a quarterback that, excels much more at throwing the ball downfield. I think that he also is going to be coming into a role where he has a guy opposite him in Ryan Williams that's going to be getting a lot of attention. And I think that attention that Ryan Williams is going to be bringing is going to free up Jeremy Bernard to have a lot of success. I think that Bernard has kind of gone under the radar this offseason and has gone kind of at a point where even though he was a starter all last season, came with Kalen DeBoer from Washington, was an elite receiver last season as well. Just he's kind of gone under the radar and hasn't been talked about enough. And personally, I think that Bernard is going to be somebody that has an absolutely phenomenal season. I would expect both Ryan Williams and Bernard to have over 1,000-yard seasons this upcoming season. So I think Alabama has 2,000-yard receivers. I previously mentioned, and this is going to kind of go into my prediction as well, I do also think that Ty Simpson is going to have a 4,000-yard passing season, and I would put it Ty Simpson to finish first, second, or third team SEC by the end of everything, right? I think that your top three in the SEC is going to end up being Lenore Sellers, Garrett Nussmeier, and I actually think Ty Simpson, right? So I think those are going to be your top three. Obviously, Arch Manning is going to compete at that highest level. Surprise, surprise. Four of those teams are four of the top five that people think are going to finish in the SEC. A lot of that is because of them having some of the more known commodities at the quarterback level. Again, I know that Alabama's quarterback is not a fully known commodity, but again, I do fully trust in Ty Simpson. Some other predictions that I think, and some other guys that I think are going to have some really big seasons. I think that Bray Hubbard in a full season, obviously he came in and played a major role in Keon Sabb being out last season when he hurt his foot. But I think that Bray Hubbard in an entire season is going to be elite in the back end. I think that his ball skills and how well he plays, kind of that free safety position, being able to kind of lurk and just, read the quarterback's eyes and make a play on the ball, having 3 interceptions and just being the elite ball guy that he was last season. I think that he is going to have another breakout season. You could argue he had a bit of one last season, but I think he'll have another one this upcoming season. I would expect 3 to 4 interceptions for him this upcoming season. It would not shock me if he had more. I just think that the ball skills that he has and the role that he's going to play, on top of the fact that you already have the other elite defensive backs that we've already talked about in Xavier Brown and Damani Jackson and, Deshaun Jones or whoever you think is going to be that Husky. I think that Alabama has enough guys where Bray Hubbard's going to be able to have a very successful season. I talked about how I think he's a bit of an unknown commodity, but I do believe that Nikhai Hill-Green is going to have a breakout season, right? Even though he is a newcomer this upcoming season, I do think that he fits the role that we miss with Jihad Campbell, and I think that he's going to perfectly slide into that role. So I do think he actually has a phenomenal season. Just because he's an unknown commodity does not mean that I don't think that he's going to have that success. Again, I think that he has the success. I just felt like it had to be mentioned that he is an unknown factor this upcoming season. Like I said, I think that what we've seen out of what he was able to accomplish at Colorado, I think is going to play in what Kane Womack is going to ask him to do on that defense. I think he's going to slide into that linebacker role perfectly that we missed in Jihad Campbell. Do I think that they're different players in some ways? Of course. However, I do think that Nikhai Hill-Green is going to slide into that role, and I think that he's going to have a breakout season. I don't think that he's going to have quite the level of production that Jihad Campbell is, but I think he's going to be more than sufficient and have a phenomenal season and be a guy that every team has to account for when you snap the football, similar to what you had to do with Jihad Campbell this last season. From a pass rush perspective, I think that a guy like Quay Russaw is somebody that I'm expecting to have a big season. He's somebody that I think that has sat for the last couple of seasons. Obviously, he played, but I think that he's kind of sat behind guys and waited his turn. And I think at this point, he's going to be the guy that's going to have a breakout season from a pass rush perspective. I don't want to predict how many sacks he's going to have because, obviously you can have combo sacks or multiple guys combined and so many different things. So I'm not sure of an exact number, but I do think that Quay Russaw is going to be the guy on that defensive line that steps up and is able to have a successful season. I think that when you have these Alabama guys that are, have wanted to play for the state for so long, but are also just highly, highly talented guys that are, very successful and, have something to prove almost. I think that those are some of the guys that I expect to have some of the bigger breakout seasons. I think that Quay Russaw is a perfect example of that. I think that Quay Russaw is going to be the guy that, in my mind, him and LT Overton are going to be two of the bigger names when you're talking about a sack numbers that are going to put up some numbers that Alabama fans are going to be very, very happy with come this coming fall. That's my major predictions. I think the only other, big prediction that I think I have is that I think that Alabama leads the SEC in turnovers. Turnovers forced, right? I think a lot of that has to do with the depth that Alabama has on that defense returning. Alabama has an absolutely insane returning defense this upcoming season. 8 guys who started are back this upcoming season, and I think that is a number, on just the defensive side of the ball. I believe it's 14 overall with 8 on defense and 6 on offense. But you have, having those 8 guys returning on defense, and then also, again, when you talk about a guy like Bray Hubbard returning, having played as much as he did with Keon Sabb being hurt last season, and, you got some guys some additional reps that potentially would not have gotten them last season. And I think that in general, Alabama's defense is in a position where they are going to be very, very successful. I think when you combine that with the fact that Kane Wommack's defense is known for forcing turnovers. I think that it's kind of a match made in heaven. It's going to be a perfect combination. I think that Alabama leads the SEC in turnovers forced. I think that a lot of that's going to be interceptions, but I do think that they lead the SEC in turnovers forced. Now we're going to transition over to schedule. I want to go game by game, give my general overall thoughts. As always, if you've not been subscribed to the channel for too long, I give previews and breakdowns of every game. Win or loss, I'm going to give a preview of every game. I'm going to give a breakdown of every game the week that they happen, right? So this will not serve as a score prediction for every game. This is going to be just a little bit of an idea as to, do I think this is going to be a close game? What do I think that, some major red flags or things that we might need to watch out for in this schedule, and just general overall, like, this is my overall, prediction for wins and losses for the entire season. Again, we will go through each game in particular the week that they happen, as always. So subscribe to the channel if you are interested in seeing those. First things first, we got Florida State. Simply put, Thomas Castellanos speaking, and kind of riling up the guys, I think was the stupidest thing he could have ever done. I think that Alabama already had a lot to prove, and I think that you even saw some of that with the SEC Media Days. Kalen DeBoer was asked the question, what do you think of last season? Do you think the last season was a success? And Kalen DeBoer had to basically say the answer is no, of course. The idea is that we make the college football playoff, that we potentially try to make a national title game. That's the standard at the University of Alabama. You have to make the playoff. And so they already were going to have a chip on their shoulder this upcoming season. Obviously, losing a couple of games last season, that was also going to have them that chip on their shoulder. So I already thought that Alabama was going to come out, pretty hot for this first game. Pair that with the fact that Florida State is just not good. Florida State was not a team that scared anyone last season. They were not a team that I was particularly scared about when I saw them on the schedule for this upcoming season. Then you compare that with the fact that Castellanos started talking smack in the offseason. I expect this game to be a 4-touchdown or more blowout. I would expect that Alabama absolutely runs away with this game. I would expect this is going to be a situation where Kalen DeBoer and Ryan Grubb, kind of prove, flex their muscle of this is what the offense can do, and Kane Wommack flexes the muscle on, you trying to say that you run through the ACC, but we saw what your actual stats were. Let's show you what a real defense can do. And I think that the defense just tees off on him. I would expect multiple turnovers by Castellanos in this game, and I do truly think that Alabama just runs away with this one. I would expect this to be a blowout. Louisiana Monroe, I think that Alabama wins, right? I think Alabama wins that game fairly easily. Wisconsin in Tuscaloosa, again, I feel very comfortable in that game. I think that Alabama wins that, fairly comfortably. Call it, 10 to 21 points. I think that Alabama, wins that game fairly easily. And then you have a bye before we head to Athens, Georgia. And in my mind, the game in Athens, Georgia is going to come down to the two starting quarterbacks. And the reason I think that it comes down to the two starting quarterbacks is, as I've said in this episode, I am very comfortable and I'm very happy with Ty Simpson as our starting quarterback. I think that he's going to be very successful this upcoming season. I could make that same argument that a lot of Georgia fans feel that same way about Gunnar Stockton. The question is, neither guy has started. So this is going to be their fourth game. It's going to be one of the biggest games of the year. And the question is who shows up, right? Last season, you had a matchup of Milroe versus Carson Beck. And, the guy that showed up was Ryan Williams. He showed up. He became a star. And Ryan Williams, wins the game for the University of Alabama. The question is who shows up in Athens, Georgia. I will say that Athens is a place that Alabama historically has played pretty well. But I would expect their fans to be completely fired up for this game. I would expect that this is going to be a very close game. Win or loss, I think that obviously this game does not hurt your long-term ramifications of how well you're going to succeed in the SEC. But that game is one that obviously I expect that Alabama has circled and will be a very good game. Partially because of how Kalen DeBoer has played in big games, especially with some time to prepare. actually probably going to predict Alabama to win that game. I think that the situation, sits out nicely. That I think that Alabama can pull that one off, but I do think it's going to be a very good game. And win or loss, I don't think that either way would shock me. Vanderbilt. I would put this one in the same level as Florida State. However, I think that Alabama was completely embarrassed last season. I think that Diego Pavia was able to prove and able to do things to Alabama's defense that Kane Womack was able to fix later on in the season. But I think that Kane Womack will be out to prove that he is not going to have that issue this upcoming season. The option that Pavia is going to run and whether it be the shovel pass, whatever it is, I think that Alabama is going to be ready and prepared for that game. And I think that Alabama is going to win that game. I think that Alabama wins the game. I'm not sure exactly by how much. I do also think that there's substantial value in it being in Tuscaloosa. Not to say that playing in Vanderbilt is a difficult, area by any stretch. Alabama played poorly last season, but it had nothing to do with the fans. We had more fans than they did. So, I would think that that's the thing. The next game is one of the ones that I would actually circle. The next game is one that I think that Alabama needs to play an absolutely phenomenal game if they want to win. And that's the Missouri game in Columbia. I think that Missouri is a team that is going to scare some people. They are not a team that a lot of people have predicted to win a lot of game. Or, the guys in the media have them predicted to finish, fifth from last, only ahead of Vandy, Kentucky, Arkansas, and Mississippi State. They are not a, team that I think a lot of people are super high on. However, I think that Missouri is a team that if you do not play your best, they can beat you. Simply put, I think that Missouri has some guys on their roster that I think Missouri potentially is going to be able to beat some people that they should not beat. They have the transfer quarterback in Bo Perbula from Penn State. They have, they spent a lot of money on their roster. They have a very good team in this upcoming season. I think that, part of the reason why the media did not pick them super high is there's a lot of unknowns on their team. But playing in Columbia, Missouri is not a super easy place to play. They've been able to knock off some teams. So that is a game that I would circle, right? That is a game where I'm not going to say that Alabama automatically runs away with that game. Could Alabama win that game? Absolutely. However, that is not one that I am going to bet on by any stretch of the imagination. I do think that is a very tough game, or has the potential at least to be a very tough game for Alabama. So it is not one that I would gloss over. I think that it could be a very tough game. You have Tennessee then coming to Tuscaloosa. That's going to be a rivalry game. Obviously, revenge from last season. I think that Alabama is going to be able to pull that off. I do not believe in Tennessee's quarterback that they have replaced Nico with after all the offseason shenanigans that happened. I think that Alabama is going to be able to beat Tennessee. Obviously, Tennessee's offense was not the reason why they won that game last season. I think it was obviously Alabama's inability to score the ball. And I do think that Ryan Grubb is going to be able to score on Tennessee. So, in my mind, that immediately goes advantage Alabama. Alabama wins that game. Then, arguably the other insanely difficult game that Alabama is going to have. Alabama has 3 very tough road games this upcoming season. If you don't include Auburn, 4 if you want to include Auburn as well. But Alabama plays South Carolina in Columbia. Lenore Sellers, obviously a known commodity. Alabama barely able to escape with the win last season, 27-25. Do I think it changes because Alabama is able, obviously Kane Womack is going to be more prepared, obviously have the defense better prepared for what Lenore Sellers can do? Yes, I think that's a pretty big value. Additionally, I think that there's substantial value in having Ryan Grubb calling the plays and having Ty Simpson being the quarterback as compared to Jalen Milroe. However, I still think that South Carolina game is going to be a big game, right? I think that is going to be a massive game and going to be one that you have to have circled. Lenore Sellers is a top ranked quarterback in the country and in the SEC for a reason. And he is somebody that you absolutely have to circle because he is a guy that can absolutely make you pay with his arm and his legs. So he is somebody that you will have to circle, goes without saying. Then you have a bye before LSU comes to town with Garrett Nussmeier. I think that Alabama is going to be able to beat LSU this upcoming season. I do think that LSU was embarrassed last season in Tiger Stadium. I was at that game. But I do think that LSU was embarrassed in that game. So I do think that they will try to do their absolute best, and Garrett Nussmeier will try to will them to a victory in Tuscaloosa. He is a guy who has been in Tuscaloosa quite a few times, obviously when his dad was coaching for the University of Alabama and obviously in the SEC in general. But I think that Alabama is going to be able to take care of LSU. Oklahoma is one, obviously, that's a little bit of an unknown commodity with John Mateer. John Mateer is a good quarterback from Wazoo. He is somebody that is going to be playing up to a level of competition that he has not played, up to this point. So I am curious to see, what is he going to do with the level of competition in the SEC? I think that he could be very good. He may not be. The question there again becomes, however, is it, I think that the reason why Alabama lost that Oklahoma game, that goes without saying, was who we had at quarterback. I think that Jalen Milroe lost us that game last season, and I think that's a crazy statement to say. As often as I said, there were some games that he won us. That LSU game is a perfect example of a game that, Jalen Milroe is phenomenal, and then that Oklahoma game, it was just absolutely awful, right? Yin and yang, the good with the bad. So that is one that I will definitely look at. I think that Alabama is going to be able to win. I think that Alabama is going to look at the revenge spot from losing last season. I think that Alabama will be able to win. And then you have the Auburn game. Because it's in Auburn, you have to say a bit of a coin flip. However, I do think that Alabama is just the better team. And so I do think that Alabama wins in Auburn. However, of course, that place has tons of voodoo, so nothing would truly shock me. But if you were to have me guess, I would say Alabama probably goes like 11-2 with losing 2 of 3, Georgia, Missouri, and South Carolina. Right? Would 12-1 shock me? No. Would 10-3 shock me? No. But my pick says 11-2. And I think that 11-2 probably is enough to get you into the SEC title game, depending upon tiebreakers and such. And I personally think that game potentially would be against University of Texas. I think that Texas is going to be the team. They're going to be able to get over the hump, and it's going to be, I potentially look at a Texas versus Alabama. And then it's a situation of, do you trust Sark more? Do you trust Kalen DeBoer more? I think it's a bit of a coin flip. I think that obviously DeBoer was able to beat Sark in the college football playoff game. When they have faced each other, he has been very successful. So I do think that DeBoer is going to have a chance. I think that Alabama can absolutely win the SEC, but my SEC title game is Alabama versus Texas. For sake of the argument, I will go with Alabama. Like I said, I'm looking at like 11-2 potentially. Like I said, if I had to guess right now for losses, let's say Georgia and South Carolina. At Georgia and at South Carolina is your 2 losses. If I had to guess as of July the 29th when I'm recording this. So that's what my current thoughts are as it relates to Alabama this upcoming season. I think there's a lot of positives you can look at. Obviously, there's a lot of returners. There's a lot of positives that we can look at. There are some obviously unknown things that we need to think about. I think that a lot hinges on how successful that Ty Simpson is going to be able to be. If Ty Simpson comes out as like a surefire, top 10 pick in the NFL draft, how he's playing, I think that 12-1's on the table. I think that Alabama opens up the ability to be able to just be absolutely dominant, and just do absolutely insane things the entire season, beat a lot of people that ton of people are going to predict that we lose to. However, if Ty Simpson is just a pretty good quarterback, I think that there's going to be some situations where I'd be very curious how Alabama fares against a team like Georgia, against a team like Missouri, against a team like South Carolina, because I think that those games become much more into question if Ty Simpson is only pretty good in those games and not elite like I think he potentially can be. So that's what I have to say. Like I said, this is, serves to be a bit of a breakdown for the entire season. Thank you so much for everyone for watching. Like I said, I do really appreciate all the support. If you are not currently subscribed to the channel, if you could do so, I really would appreciate it. Thank you so much, and I will catch you in the next episode. Peace.